Ever since I started painting, one of my lifelong goals is to start creating patterns that are hopefully surface pattern worthy and one day to be on fabrics, bedding, or even homeware. In today's tutorial, I will be taking you through how I paint these beautiful lilacs using the flower color guide. We are also going to be learning how to create various effects with soft wet in wet as well as more defined wet in dry. If you're new to my channel, my name is Jillian. I'm a full-time watercolor artist based in Singapore, and I love to help you to embrace the mess and magic of watercolor. Now let's jump into today's tutorial. Hello and welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to be painting something from the flower color guide, and one of the things that I enjoy doing in this channel is really breaking down into all the various flowers you can find in the flower color guide. At the same time, I want to give you the opportunity to see how I break down flowers from a reference photo. If you have been painting for a while or are a beginner, I would highly recommend this book as it gives you all the various flower shapes, different variations, and you will get to see exactly how the flowers are so that you can paint different shapes, the shadows, the light, and so on. So today I wanted to paint something that looked a little bushy. I was thinking about going with some wet in wet work, and I like to do something a little bit more complex, a little bit more like a blob, and I want to see you paint this together with me as I break it down onto the paper. Now I want to also kind of put down different flowers on my paper so you would see us build this up together on a weekly basis so that you eventually get a reference of a couple of flowers on one piece of paper that you can use in your paintings. So without further ado, let's look at today's flower. We are going to be painting the lilac flower. Now it's such a beautiful flower with these very nice soft pink hues, a little bit of white scattered around, and with these green leaves kind of peeking out. So this flower looks like it would be such a great candidate for wet in wet technique. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be laying down a layer of clean water. So this is just pure clean water, clear water, which I am going to be putting down onto the surface. Now on my setup, I've got my 100% cotton cold pressed paper from Bao Hong. I've got my paints from Senai Lier. These neon paints are from Kiss Ho, and I've got my brushes which are mainly from Silver Black Velvet. I will be using a 1-inch flat brush to help me to pre-wet the paper, following which I might change over to other types of flat brushes. Now if you don't have a flat brush, remember that you can use whatever brush that you have in your arsenal. I don't want you to feel limited by what the artist in the video is using, because I believe that as long as you're familiar with the shapes that your brushes can make, you can paint with whatever tools that you have currently. I've also got my 2 cups of water here to help me with my wet work, to help me with washing my paints and keeping my brushes clean. So now that we are ready, my palettes have already been sprayed down with clean water. I am going to go in and paint this lilac. Now I'm so extremely excited to paint this lilac because it has been a while since I've been painting. I have been doing this 5-day painting wildflower challenge, of which we did something similar where we painted different flowers on a piece of paper, and I have been aching to paint myself, but I've been so busy with my kids and learning about you and the work that you're doing, the artwork, supporting you, and this is where finally I'm getting some time to paint. So I'm pre-wetting my paper here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up my batch of paints. Now I can see that the colors that are apparent on the reference photo is this really nice light hue, and this I'm going to just pick up whatever existing paints that I have. I think that what I have there is a Senai Lier red, as well as going to pick up some neon paints because I really like my neon paints. I'm also going to pick up a little bit of yellow so you get a bit of that coral kind of color, and this is a very light wash. I'm going to be just dropping them randomly in these spots, and it's almost hard for you to see, so I'm going to bring you in so that you can get a closer look of where I'm dropping in my paints. And I'm just going to be scattering them around in a very light manner, almost like I'm painting certain parts of the shadows and the light. And I'm using my brush to give me some of these nice shapes that you see here. So I'm just adding in a couple of a bit darker neon colors. So you get to see some of that forming, and you can see because I'm dipping in while the paint is still wet, you get this nice fuzzy kind of look. That's what I want. Now I'm going to do the same around here. This time I've got a bit more of an orangey kind of flower shape. I'm not really planning where exactly I'm putting it. I'm just giving these rough spaces here and there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to be adding my greens, and I've got a phthalo green here, but it's so stark, so I'm just going to add a tinge of my neon paints in. So straight away you can see that it mutes the color down a little, and I'm just going to be adding some of that here just to give it a hint of where the leaves are exactly. And you can see I'm being very rough with where I'm putting things. And in fact, today I'm kind of feeling for fast work. So I'm painting pretty fast, if you can see. This is all in real time, so I'm not speeding up this part. It's me going a little faster than my usual tempo. And this is almost like something that my body is aching to do. So it's fun to get to figure out and feel a bit about what your body feels like in this moment as well. As you're doing this, I can see that there are some green leaves kind of peeking out here. My paper is still a little wet, so I'm letting it do its nice blend thing going on. And you know, when I'm saying this blendy thing going on, I'm basically talking about the movement of paint and water while it is still wet. So I can see that there are some lines around, and I'm kind of trying to go in, looking at the reference photo where there are some leaves peeking around. I'm just adding some of that in. Now you can see that because the leaves are a slightly darker shade, it gives the illusion of contrast between your flowers, and I love that. I love to add that contrast. And I'm going to switch over to my smaller brush just to add a couple of greens around. And I'm doing this because I'm basically mapping out where I'm assuming or wanting the greens to be in this flower, so that when we're adding in the pinks, we don't miss out on some of these greens that are meant to be in that flower. I'm also mindful of not having my brush too wet while I'm doing this, because parts of my paper could be damp and I don't want those blooms and backwash to happen. So you have to be very mindful of that. And if you're new to watercolor, one of the things that I would encourage you to pay attention to is the paint is to water ratio on your brush, and think about how much paint you have on your brush, on your palette, everywhere. Start thinking about that, because that's going to help you to figure out the reason behind all of those times where you have created blooms and backwash that you unintentionally made or created that maybe you didn't want. So I'm adding those greens there, and straight away you can see because of those greens, the pinks kind of pop a little, but they're still extremely faded. So let's add a bit of depth there. Now I'm going to change over back to my flat brush. So I went into my smaller detailed brush, which was a size 6, and now I'm going into my flat brush. I am scattering marks using the flat brush. Now, when you are using the flat brush, I want you to not limit yourself to just seeing its edge and thinking that it's going to come off like square shapes. You can also use the corner of the brush or add pressure to it, and the way in which you hold your brush, place pressure, press against it, the different parts of the brush in itself that you use is going to influence the type of shapes that appear. I am not too fussed or worried about the various shapes that I'm putting on, because on the whole, when you look at my painting, that very big white space was essentially the white flowers that I'm mapping out. So these red and pink hues that I'm adding are actually the shadows that I see. So if you look at the reference photo and look at those gray spots, there is where I'm adding my red and pinks. So when you paint loosely, your shadows don't have to be gray and they don't have to be dark. You can use whatever color you like, and I think that's the fun bit of it. I think it also takes a lot from us to rewire the way we see things, because sometimes we tend to want to paint the same color as what we see in the reference photo. So I can totally understand where you came from, and it also took me a while to exercise that kind of license. Now, I am actually eyeballing the areas that are still wet, and there are small little hints of puddles that are around, and I'm just basically going in and dabbing in a darker color. So what I'm doing is called charging, and when I do that, you get those really nice blends. However, the spaces that are really dry, like where I'm focusing on right now, you can see that the lines are a lot more defined, and I don't actually get so much of a bleed anymore. So whenever you're looking at the way I'm painting, ask yourself, do you see the paint moving and blending? If you don't, then most likely my paper is dry. However, if you see that it blends in, then most likely my paper is still wet or damp. So I'm just moving around the edges of this flower, and I have also started to go in and add a little green. And what I'm doing when I'm cycling back and forth between the greens and the pinks is that I'm trying to establish the edge of the flower. Now the greens are going to start where the edge of the flower is, and it's going to move outwards. On the other hand, the reds are also the edge of the flower where the flower ends. So this is how I'm basically mapping out my shape. So just in case you're thinking that everything looks very random, but rather there is some kind of plan. So I'm adding in darker hues with my small round brush. This is a silver black velvet. I really love this brush because it gives such a really nice thin sharp point, and it's really good for details. It's also really good for adding in really thin stems, so I would highly recommend this brush. Now I'm also trying to not add too many lines, and what I'm doing is that if you look at the reference photo, there's some of these really small little stems that are coming out with small little leaves. I'm trying to mimic some of that, but you don't have to paint every single thing. So just go with your license and decide which are the portions you want to add. The style in which I want to create this painting in is really where I find that the flowers are barely there, and you can see that there is such strong use of white space in this painting. So you can see that the centers particularly are where all of those white spaces are. I'm going in with my neon color and I'm just adding in really small marks, and I want to tell you what pattern I'm doing when I'm painting all of these marks. So basically, once I enter closer to the center of the flower, this is where my marks are a lot darker and it's a lot smaller, and that's because the centers are usually where you get most amount of shadows, following which the areas that are towards the edge of the flowers are usually a lot bigger and of lighter color. So this is how I'm planning out my colors, my paintings, and as well as my shape, so you get a better idea of how I actually put down the different shapes and marks, so it doesn't look as random as it looks like while I'm doing this painting. However, this is a great opportunity for you to use your brush and really vary the amount of pressure that you put on your brush. Also think about the way in which you're holding it. Try holding it on a higher part of your brush or even closer to the ferrule just to see what exactly you get, because when you are adjusting the positioning of your brush hold, you are going to get different types of marks. Now I'm starting to add in my darker tones, and these are mostly, as I mentioned, closer to the centers. And I'm also eyeballing the reference photo, because the reference photo, when you squint, you're going to get those big darker shapes, and this is how you identify where your shadows actually fall. One of the things I really enjoy doing when I paint is to add really random odd colors that really pop or bring highlight to the color. So right now you're going to watch me put in a grayish blue color that I have mixed, and this grayish blue color actually comes from a Holbein. It's an ash blue color and it's actually gouache, so you can see that it's a lot thicker in consistency, and I find that when I add this color, it really brings together all the pinks and the greens together. And when I decided on this color, what I wanted to do was to think about the color scheme that would really complement and bring everything together. Now, thinking about color families and color schemes are so important because this is going to help you to bring harmony to your paintings. You're going to have to find out or ask yourself what exactly are the colors you would like to have in your painting, and then from there start to think about the different variations, because there's so many different variations of blue, there's so many different variations of pink and red and even your greens. So from there, creating your painting with different variations is really going to help you to bring out the various colors together or help certain colors stand out a little more. Another thing I want you to think about is that leaves don't have to be leaf shaped. They're really just marks on a paper, and this is what exactly I'm doing with my brush. I'm just making marks. There might be one or two leaves that really look like leaf shapes, and everything else is really just a mixture of swishing my brush around, whether it's using the side of the brush or using the tip of the brush, and kind of adjusting the pressure. Also, you can start to add some lines to your painting, because I find that lines really... Another thing I want you to think about is that leaves don't have to be leaf shaped. they're really just marks on a paper, and this is what exactly I'm doing with my brush. I'm just making marks. There might be one or two leaves that really look like leaf shapes, and everything else is really just a mixture of swishing my brush around, whether it's using the side of the brush or using the tip of the brush, and kind of adjusting the pressure. Also, you can start to add some lines to your painting, because I find that lines really give the viewer a space to look at. It also changes your composition when you add lines. And I'm adding in a slightly brighter green, because what I noticed was that I had a light green and then I also had a very dark blue, and I did not have a mid-tone. So think about the various tones in which you're painting with. I tend to go in 3 different tones. Of course, you can go 4, but I find that 2 is insufficient. So I usually have a light tone, a mid-tone, and then a dark tone when I'm painting, because this helps me to map out my color values a little better. So your color values will be your darkness and lightness of color. So think about all of that and have that in consideration when you. And I thought that it would be fun to add a couple of lilacs, just almost like it's looking in the distance. You can see that these here are literally me just putting down marks. So I'm using my square brush and I'm just dabbing in some really faint pink. Subsequently, you're going to see me add to that and add a little bit of red, and this is exactly the same kind of color tones, except this time I'm adding way less detail. So I'm focusing a lot more on just allowing it to be blurry, so that the flower that you see right now in the center stands out a lot more. If you pay attention to how I'm just using marks and creating some of these marks, you can see that really any blob can be a bloom as long as it's pink and as long as it's green. So try not to take your art too seriously. Really go loose and ask yourself what you feel like. Maybe today is not a day that you want too much details and you want something a lot looser and more fun, and this is where something as simple as this across the entire page could also be so fun and creative to try out and do. Then what I'm also doing is that I'm still going in and adding a couple of lines, and you can see just by doing that I am creating just a slight bit of definition to this background. And I'm also not pulling away too much attention from the center, which is where I want my focal point to be. Thank you for painting together with me today. I had so much fun doing this painting. Now I'm going to be really honest with you because at the beginning, I just wanted to paint these lilacs on its own. However, what I noticed was that it looked really bare at certain spots, and this is where I started adding in some of those soft areas. When I started doing that, it was when I could see the potential of creating a surface pattern design, and depending on where you were with following me in the tutorial, you are definitely allowed to just stop at that very center piece of lilac, or you can carry on and create other patterns as I have done. I find that creating that variation can really help you to understand the way in which watercolor can work for you, especially if you are wondering how to create flowers that are more in the focal point and flowers that are more towards the background. I want to let you know that if you are new to watercolor, I have an ebook that is going to guide you through the various techniques, supplies, as well as ways to troubleshoot your painting. You can find the link to that ebook in the description below. I cannot wait to paint together with you again, and until then, thank you for your support, your subscription, your likes, your comments, because all of that really makes my time spent so much more worthy.